Trying to have productive conversations with another person about closely held beliefs can be pretty tricky, and this is certainly the case when it comes to Jehovah's Witnesses. The topic of having conversations with Jehovah's Witnesses comes up quite a bit on XJW forums, and of course in a lot of email communication that I get. So if you haven't had much success in that arena, I'd recommend trying a conversation method that's a little bit different to help explore their beliefs with them. This method is called street epistemology, sometimes just called SE. And the great thing about this method is that it will work for just about any belief, not just on JWs, and you can even use it on yourself to help you evaluate your own beliefs. You're probably wondering, what is street epistemology? It's a little bit different than a normal conversation where you have a back and forth exchange of ideas and thoughts. You're still having a friendly conversation with a person, but instead of an exchange of those ideas, you're focusing on the particular belief or topic at hand and using questions to help that person evaluate if the pathway that they have used to arrive at that conclusion is logically sound. And it doesn't need to be a straight up question and answer format as though it were some type of interrogation with the person. It can be a totally normal conversation, speaking with them about their beliefs, acknowledging some of the interesting ideas and points that they may have, but perhaps giving you the opportunity to play devil's advocate, help them to see how someone else who doesn't already share their belief, what would they think of their viewpoint? Would they be convinced by the reasoning they're using? As in a lot of cases, learning something new can be easier if you can see it in action. I know my brief description of it here really hasn't done it much justice, so I'd highly recommend going and checking out some real-world examples of it. The information I present here is what I've collected from a gentleman named Anthony Magnabosco. If you're unaware of his work, I'd highly recommend checking out his YouTube channel and seeing all the different ways that he's been able to use this method in having conversations with other people. He has hundreds of videos uploaded that show conversations on a wide range of topics with many different interlocutors. Just search for his name on YouTube and you'll find him pretty much instantly. But if it makes it easier for you, I've also added a link for it down in the description. Before trying to have a conversation with a JW using SE, I'd highly recommend that you at least watch 5 of the videos that Anthony has uploaded. 3 of them deal with conversations that he had with members of the LDS Church, or Mormons, and it can be really nice to see how he handled a conversation with a religion that has some similarities to JWs. The other 2 that I'd recommend are regarding a conversation that he had with an individual named Dan. Now, in the first conversation that they had together, Dan was discussing his beliefs, why he believes them, but by the end of the conversation, you really didn't know what was going on in his head. He didn't give any indication as to how he felt at the end of the discussion. Well, fast forward a couple of years, and you'll find that Dan has contacted Anthony to let him know that that conversation had an impact on him, and it helped him to evaluate some of the beliefs that he had. So they uploaded an interview together highlighting some of the main points of the conversation that Dan felt interesting, highlighting some of the things that he appreciated. And so it can be really helpful for you to see just what were the feelings of someone who was on the other side of that conversation, what was going through their head, what motivated them, and what were the positive things that they took from it to be able to benefit from it later and actually consider their reasons for belief. And I'll also include those in the description too, so you can get a direct link at them and make it easy for you. Okay, so now let's go ahead and get into the method and see how we can use it. There are several key points to keep in mind whenever you have a conversation with someone regarding their beliefs, and again, this is especially important with a JW. This first list of points isn't the actual method or questions used, but rather they're things that you're going to want to keep in your mind and be cognizant of during your conversation. If you feel the need to skip around this video to get to a different part, I've added chapters in it to help you get around. The first point is, do not try to trick them into having a conversation with gotcha moments. They must be a willing participant in the conversation. If at any point they feel that they've been deceived into talking about this matter, they may never give you another chance. Point number 2 is to remember that your objective is not to try to change their mind through presenting facts. We all know that rarely works. Rather, the point is to explore their belief with them, helping them to find out if the pathway that they have used to arrive at that belief is logically sound. Point number 3 is do not comment negatively on their answers or their reasoning on a topic. Instead, acknowledge what they've said and perhaps ask further non-invasive questions to get them to think further. Number 4, do not assume the meaning behind what your interlocutor says. If something seems unclear, that may be a clue that you need to define some terms so that both of you are on the same page. Repeat back what you think they mean to ensure that you both understand each other, always attempting to steelman their argument and present the best possible form of it. Number 5, at no point in the conversation should the person feel that they're under pressure or are being interrogated. If you can tell by their body language that it looks like they're getting uncomfortable, that might be the time to just put that conversation on the shelf and maybe have it on another day if they ever feel up for it again. Number 6, ensure that the conversation stays respectful and never gets heated. If it gets to that point, they may just end the conversation immediately, or they'll have such a bad memory of it, they're never going to want to talk to you again about it. Number 7, most likely you are not going to see any changes in their beliefs or thinking patterns at the end of the conversation. That's something that might take weeks, months, or years as they ponder over the questions that were asked. Many of us have actually done this to ourselves when we were going through our wake-up process. We asked ourselves questions bit by bit, and again, over perhaps a large period of time, we came to realize that maybe our reasons for believing what we did, they weren't actually good reasons. And the 8th point is that this method is used to get the one with the beliefs in question to do the talking instead of us trying to explain to them why we no longer believe it. That could be a conversation for another day. Feel free to pause here and take a snapshot of the points I just discussed if it helps you to see the whole list in full. Having covered that, we can now jump into some questions that I might ask someone if they were willing to explain their beliefs. This pretty much takes all pressure off of you and forces them to explain their belief. Given that we're framing this discussion from the viewpoint of speaking with a JW, I'll present the rest of this from that angle. The conversation can simply start maybe like this. I know you probably don't understand why I ended up leaving the truth because it was such an important part of my life, but I ended up realizing that my reasons for belief, I just no longer found them to be good reasons. Maybe you could tell me why you believe this is the truth. Just a bit of a disclaimer here. You'll probably notice that in this video or other videos that I do, I'll sometimes use vernacular that is unique to Jehovah's Witnesses, like the truth or worldly. Under normal circumstances, I don't use these words, or at least in the way that Jehovah's Witnesses do. However, I feel that if you're speaking with a Jehovah's Witness, it probably is best and makes them most comfortable if you're using the words that they're familiar with. But I do agree that, in general, once you wake up and leave the organization, it is best to kind of move away from those types of words, that vernacular, to help distance yourself from the indoctrination. Question number 1. What is your belief? Well, obviously in this case, we're speaking to a JW, so we're asking them why do they think that Jehovah's Witnesses have the truth and that they are the only religion that God is using today. Question number 2. Out of curiosity, if you were to put it on a scale of 0 to 100 as to how confident you are, in this belief, where would you place yourself? Now, this may seem like a bit of an odd question, but it does serve a useful purpose if you choose to use it. You can use it at the beginning of your conversation to gauge their confidence level as to how sure they are in that particular belief. Then, at the end of the conversation, you could ask them again and see if that confidence level has changed at all. As an example, I would have probably considered myself 98% sure that Jehovah's Witnesses were the truth. And of course, that confidence level started dropping pretty rapidly once I started doing research. Likewise, it could be that by the end of your conversation, they may not have that same confidence level. It might have dropped by a percentage point or 2. But definitely don't expect that to happen. And if they do mention that it's changed at all, don't react to it because that could be off-putting. Question number 3. Why do you believe it? meaning what evidence do you have that gives you your conviction? Speaking with a JW, there's a wide range of responses that you might get. It could be that Bible prophecy showed that the organization was chosen in 1919, or that they're the only ones who do the worldwide preaching work, or that maybe they're the only ones that show genuine love to each other, that they have literature in hundreds of languages, or that they don't believe the false doctrines of Christendom, and so on and so forth. So in these cases, the best thing to do is probably to ask them to pick their best and most solid line of evidence that convinces them and focus on that point. Question number 4. What would it take for you to change your view or perhaps diminish your confidence in it? By asking this question, you might not actually get a legitimate response back. But what it may do at the very least is get them to at least internally recognize that something might be a little bit unbalanced, because as a Jehovah's Witness, when they go out into their preaching territory, they're expecting everyone that's at their homes to be able to listen objectively to the information that they present that, of course, is trying to get them to change their mind about their own beliefs and their religion. Question number 5. Do you care that it is true and that you can support it with facts and evidence? Or perhaps do you like the way that it makes you feel, that comfort that it gives you, and that has high value to you? Now, this question can be a little bit tricky, and I would only use this in a situation where I had a good rapport with someone. It could put them on the defense, depending on how this is worded, but it might become necessary if it becomes evident that the evidence that they're using to come to their belief is lacking, and instead maybe their feelings are the motivating factor. So be careful with that one. Question number 6. Do you only look for evidence that would prove your view, or do you also look for evidence that might prove your view wrong? This is an essential question for a Jehovah's Witness. Every witness on the planet knows that they are not supposed to investigate anything negative that they hear about the organization. They should only trust the information that comes directly from the organization itself, because, after all, the entire world is in the control of Satan, and he will use anything at his disposal to make the organization look bad, including lying and stretching the truth. That scare tactic is so successful that most witnesses have no idea of what even the criticisms are against the religion, nor do they have any idea of how much evidence backs that up. You likely aren't going to get them to admit that they do any legitimate research against their beliefs or the organization, but you've at least highlighted a faulty standard there. Number 7. Does your belief have a test to prove it false? This one is pretty closely related to the previous question, but it is coming from a slightly different angle, so you can pick and choose which one you think might fit your situation best. For a witness, it's going to be pretty tough to get them to admit that there's a test for proving it false, because we all know that doesn't exist. You have been told that there is no reason ever to leave the organization. If anyone in the religion has done something wrong that perhaps conflicts with Bible standards that could stumble others, even if it was a high-up person in the leadership, including a governing body member, that is never a reason to leave the organization, because that individual, or even group of men, will have to stand before Jehovah for their actions. If you secretly disagree with the doctrine, just be patient with it, because who knows, at some point in the future, they may change their view on it. If a teaching or policy was wrong in the past, then what's important is that new light was shown on the matter, and does it matter at all the fact that that was actually a false teaching? If you leave the organization, then you have left Jehovah. And of course, that doesn't even matter if you've left and still maintain your beliefs in God and are serving God in some other Christian denomination. This indoctrination has trained them that there is nothing that can prove the religion false. Again, this question can just help to get them thinking and might get them a little bit uncomfortable at recognizing the double standard. Question number 8. Is your standard for evidence that supports your view consistent with your standard of evidence that would change your view? It could be that they only required this level of evidence to get them to believe that it was a truth, but yet they would require this amount of evidence to get them to believe that maybe there was something wrong with it. So of course, looking at it that way, we can see their balance might actually be off. This of course will depend on the topic you're discussing. But as an example of this, I remember growing up as a Jehovah's Witness, hearing that we are separate from the world and we stand out as different from all the other religions. So when it came out that the Catholic Church had major issues with child abuse, Jehovah's Witnesses everywhere jumped on that immediately, stating that, look, here right is a prime example of proof that the Catholic Church does not have God's blessing. In fact, God is using this opportunity so that the entire world could see just how corrupt their organization is. After this issue came to light and it was broadcast in the news everywhere, witnesses criticized every single Catholic Church member who continued to stay a member of the church despite knowing about all of these abuses. Well, what would a JW do if they found out that their own beloved religion also has a massive issue with child abuse and that they refuse to report it to the authorities unless they are required to do so by law and can't claim clergy penitent privilege just like all the other churches in Christendom do? Likely, they would just shrug that off as unimportant once that spotlight has been placed on them. Question number 9. Is the evidence you have objective or subjective? Could someone else see that evidence and come to a different conclusion? As an example of this, someone from the LDS Church might say that you can prove whether or not the church is actually true. One way to do so would be to test the words of wisdom. If you live by the guidelines stated there, and you come out, you test it, and you end up being healthier, well, that must mean that the church is true. But would you agree with them that their line of reasoning is sound, that obviously that means the church is true? I doubt it. A JW would instantly criticize the faulty reasoning used there, and it may also lead them to scrutinize their own beliefs, things that they were taught, maybe even viewing it from the perspective of someone on the outside who wasn't constantly surrounded by that propaganda. So that basically covers some of the main questions that you might want to ask in a conversation with a Jehovah's Witness. Again, you can pause here to get an easy snapshot of all the questions I just covered. As I mentioned before, keep in mind that even when using this method, their defenses are still going to be up. So pay attention to their body language, ensuring that they don't get uncomfortable. In the end, you may have introduced them to some thoughts and questions that they'd never considered before, and now will be able to ponder over them at another time on their own. But your calm manner and respectful way of exploring their beliefs with them will leave them in the best possible condition to be able to do that. So that's pretty much all I've got for now to help you get started in using street epistemology in a conversation with a Jehovah's Witness. Be sure to check out the links in the description, since some of those can give even more detail on anything that I covered here. If this has been at least a little bit helpful to you and you think it could assist others, please hit that like button since it increases their chances of being able to see it. Stay tuned for more and see you next time.